The massive observation station of the Astra Union hung silently in the darkness of space, its crystal-like structures gleaming under the light of distant stars. Inside, Blue stood frozen before the main viewing screen, her four-fingered hand pressed against her mouth in horror. The human ship she was watching moved through space in ways that defied everything she knew about safe space travel. "They're going to kill themselves," she whispered to her research team. "No one can survive traveling like that." The human vessel, a sleek ship with solar sails spread wide, was riding what the Astrans called a death wave, a powerful gravitational disturbance that their own ships would never dare approach. But instead of being torn apart, the human ship moved like a leaf on the wind, almost dancing through the dangerous space phenomenon. "How long have they been doing this?" asked Green, Blue's assistant, his pale features reflecting the glow of their monitors. "According to our data, they've been traveling like this for over 50 years, Blue replied, checking the historical records. "They call it void surfing. It's not just for emergencies. They do it for fun." The research team watched as more data poured in from their observation posts scattered across this sector of space. Hundreds of human ships were out there, all moving with the same reckless freedom. They rode solar winds like they were ocean waves, used gravity wells as slingshots, and played with cosmic forces that the Astrans had spent generations trying to avoid. The Astra Union had achieved space travel long before humans, developing complex networks of hyperspace lanes, safe, calculated paths through space that never deviated from their programmed routes. It was orderly, predictable, and most importantly, safe. But it also meant they could only reach places connected by these lanes. "Look at this," Green called out, bringing up a new image. It showed a smaller human vessel teaching younger pilots. The students were deliberately flying into minor space disturbances, learning to feel the currents of the void. They're training their young to do this. It's not just a few crazy explorers, it's their whole culture. Blue felt a mix of fear and something else, a tiny spark of curiosity she hadn't experienced since her early days as a scientist. The humans weren't just surviving these dangerous maneuvers. They were thriving. Their ships reached places the Astra Union had marked as impossible to access. "Pull up the accident rates," she ordered, expecting to see massive casualties from this risky behavior. The numbers that appeared on screen surprised her. While there were accidents, the rate was remarkably low, barely higher than the Astrans' own hyperspace lane system. As they continued watching, a particular human ship caught their attention. It was larger than the others, with Wave Rider written on its hull in Earth letters. Unlike other vessels that passed by their observation posts, this one seemed to notice them. It adjusted its course, moving closer to their station in a series of graceful maneuvers. "They're hailing us," Green announced, his voice shaking slightly. Blue straightened her formal research robes, a nervous habit from her academy days. "Put them through," she ordered, though her own hearts were beating faster than usual. The human captain appeared on their screen, looking surprisingly casual for someone who had just surfed through what the Astrans considered deadly space conditions. He smiled, showing teeth in what Blue's xenobiology training told her was a friendly gesture, not a threat display. "Hello there, I'm Captain Tom Reed of the Earth exploration vessel Wave Rider. We've noticed your observation posts following our ships for a while now. Thought it might be time to say hi properly." The casual greeting stunned the Astran research team into silence. This human spoke as if he hadn't just done the impossible, as if dancing through the void was as normal as walking. "Would you like to learn how we do it?" Tom asked, his smile growing wider at their shocked expressions. Blue looked at her team, then back at the human captain. The ancient fears of her people warred with her scientific curiosity. In the end, curiosity won. "Yes," she heard herself say. "But first, please explain how you're still alive." Tom's laugh echoed through the communication channel, warm and genuine. "That's quite a story. How about we tell it over a visit to Earth's Space Academy? We've got some amazing things to show you." 3 days after first contact, The Wave Rider approached Earth's massive space academy. Captain Tom stood on his bridge, watching with amusement as the Astran shuttle following them maintained a perfectly calculated safe distance. The aliens had refused to board his ship, politely insisting on using their own transport. "They're scanning everything," his first officer Jack reported, checking the sensors. "Their equipment is amazing. They're mapping gravitational fields I didn't even know existed." Tom nodded, letting them gather their data. He understood their caution. After all, the Astrans had spent generations avoiding what humans now did for fun. Through their brief communications, he'd learned that their entire space program was built around avoiding any form of unpredictability. The Space Academy came into full view, a sprawling structure floating in Earth orbit. Training vessels of all sizes moved around it, some piloted by students practicing basic void surfing maneuvers. Tom noticed the Astran shuttle suddenly slowing down. "They're watching the training exercises," Jack said, grinning. Their heart rates just spiked. All three of them. The Academy's training zone was a carefully controlled chaos. Young pilots learned to ride solar winds, using small sails to catch the energy flowing from the sun. Others practiced gravitational slingshot techniques around carefully placed marker buoys. To humans, it was just another day of classes. To the Astrans, it looked like mass suicide. "Captain," Blue's voice came through the comm, tense but controlled. "Are those children in those small vessels?" "Student pilots," Tom corrected gently. "All adults, but yes, they're learning. Would you like to watch a training session up close?" There was a long pause before Blue responded. "We will observe from a safe distance. Thank you." The Astran shuttle followed them to the Academy's main docking bay, where a small welcoming committee waited. Tom had specifically requested no formal ceremony. He didn't want to overwhelm their guests. Just a few instructors and senior students stood ready to greet them. When the Astran shuttle's door opened, Blue emerged first, followed by Green and their pilot, Red. Their formal research robes seemed to shimmer under the station's lights. They moved with careful, measured steps, as if expecting the artificial gravity to fail at any moment. "Welcome to Earth Space Academy," Tom said warmly. "We've prepared a special presentation on void surfing basics, followed by a tour of our training facilities." Blue's large eyes blinked rapidly as she watched a training ship zoom past the docking bay's force field, riding a controlled burst of solar wind. "Your species truly starts training in these techniques at such a young age." "Not that young," one of the instructors, an older woman named Mary, stepped forward. "But we found that learning to feel the void's natural movements early helps develop better instincts." "Feel the void?" Green asked, his scientific curiosity briefly overcoming his fear. "You speak as if space itself is alive." "In a way, it is," Mary replied. "Come, let me show you our sensor room. You might find it interesting to compare your readings with ours." As they walked through the Academy's halls, Tom noticed the Astrans' attention drawn to every window they passed. Outside, training continued as usual. Ships diving through gravitational eddies, solar sail practice, and even some advanced students attempting complex void current navigation. In the sensor room, Mary pulled up a holographic display of local space conditions. The Astrans immediately moved closer, their fear temporarily forgotten as they studied the familiar scientific data. "These readings," Blue said, pointing to a particular pattern. "We categorize this as a Class 3 hazard zone. But your ships—" She glanced out the window again, where a training vessel was calmly passing through that very area. "What you see as hazards, we see as opportunities," Tom explained. "Every current, every gravitational wave, every solar wind, they're not our enemies. They're just part of the cosmic dance we can join." Blue stared at him for a long moment, then looked back at the data. For the first time since their arrival, Tom saw something besides fear in her eyes. It was small, but unmistakable, a spark of possibility. "Show us," she said quietly. "Show us how you dance with the void." The Academy's history hall was quiet as Blue stood before the massive display screen. Tom and Mary waited patiently while their Astran guest gathered her thoughts. The images on the screen showed ancient Astran ships, beautiful crystal structures that had once sailed the stars. It happened 3,000 years ago. Blue finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. We were like you once. Our ships rode the stars freely. We were explorers, dreamers. She touched the screen gently. Then came the great loss. Tom stepped closer, noticing how Blue's hands trembled slightly. Behind them, Green and Red moved closer too, their usual perfect posture dropping slightly at the mention of their people's greatest tragedy. Our largest exploration fleet, 5,000 ships, 20 million souls, encountered something we had never seen before, a cascade of gravitational anomalies. Blue's voice grew quieter. We called it the devouring storm. No one survived. Mary gasped softly. Even with all of humanity's space accidents, they had never lost so many at once. The scale of the tragedy was almost impossible to grasp. After that, Blue continued, we changed everything. No more free exploration. No more riding the currents of space. Every route was calculated. Every path made absolutely safe. Fear became our teacher, and safety our highest goal. Tom watched as Blue pulled up more recent Astran ship designs. The beautiful flowing crystal shapes had been replaced by rigid, geometric forms. Ships built not to work with space, but to defend against it. But you've lost something precious, haven't you? Mary asked gently. Blue nodded slowly. We've mapped only 8% of our galaxy. Our ships can only go where our hyperspace lanes are built. We see wonderful things in our telescopes, but we can never reach them. She turned to face the humans. Your way terrifies us, but we're starting to realize our fear has become a cage. Tom walked to another display, pulling up images of early human space disasters. We've had our own tragedies, he said. Lost good people learning how to dance with the void. But we learned from each loss, got better, safer. Without giving up the dance, Blue observed. Without giving up the dance, Tom agreed. Would you like to see how we teach our students to stay safe while staying free? Blue looked at her companions. Green had already pulled out a data pad, eager to learn. Red, their pilot, looked nervous but nodded slowly. They moved to the Academy's main observation deck. Below them, a training session was starting. New students in small ships were learning the basics of solar wind riding. Their movements were slow, careful, but deliberately not completely controlled. The first lesson, Mary explained, is learning to feel. Not fight, not control, just feel. They watched as an instructor's ship led a group of students through a minor solar current. The ships moved up and down, swaying slightly as they learned to read the flow of energy around them. Your ships, Blue said suddenly. They're not just machines, are they? They're more like the sailing ships from your planet's oceans. Tom smiled. Exactly. We don't force our way through space. We work with it, understand it. The void isn't our enemy. It's our partner in exploration. Blue's hands had stopped trembling. She watched the student ships with new eyes, seeing not reckless endangerment, but a careful dance, a partnership between ship and space. We would need to start slowly, she said finally. Our people, 3,000 years of fear don't disappear in a day. Of course, Mary agreed. We'll start with the basics, just feeling the currents from inside the station first. No actual flying until you're ready. Blue turned to her companions. We came here to understand how humans survive such reckless space travel. But that's not really the question, is it? She looked back at the training ships. The real question is, how did we let our fears steal the stars from us? Tom placed a reassuring hand on the console near Blue. The stars are still there. And when you're ready, we'll help you reach them again. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Blue smiled. 2 weeks after their arrival at the Space Academy, the Astrans sat in a small training ship, still safely docked inside the station's main hangar. Blue gripped the control panel tightly, her knuckles turning a lighter shade of blue. Green worked furiously on his data pad, while Red stared intently at the safety readouts. "Relax your grip a bit," Tom said gently from the instructor's seat. "Remember what we practiced in the simulator. You want to feel the ship, not fight it." The training vessel was designed for beginners, with extra safety features and enhanced sensors. Its walls were transparent, giving a clear view of space outside. In the distance, other training ships moved smoothly through their practice routines. Starting minimal power to the gravity sensors, Mary announced from her monitoring station, "You'll feel a slight vibration. That's normal. It's the ship learning to read the space around it." Blue nearly jumped as the ship hummed to life. The control panel lit up with soft colors, showing the complex dance of gravitational forces around them. It was beautiful, like watching waves on an invisible ocean. "Now," Tom continued, "just like we practiced, don't try to control everything. Let the ship tell you what it feels." Taking a deep breath, Blue loosened her grip. The sensor readings flowed through her fingers, translated into gentle movements and pressures. She could feel the massive pull of Earth below them, the lighter touch of the moon in the distance, and countless smaller tugs from nearby ships and stations. "That's it," Tom encouraged. "What do you feel?" "It's like music," Blue said wonderingly. "All these forces, they're not random at all. They have patterns, rhythms." Her scientific mind began making connections. "We always saw these as dangerous variables to be avoided, but they're more like currents in a stream." Green looked up from his pad. "The mathematics are beautiful," he added. "Not chaos at all. It's more like a complex dance." "Ready to try moving?" Tom asked. "Just inside the hangar for now." Blue nodded slowly. The other Astrans tensed, but didn't object. With careful movements, Blue engaged the ship's drive. Instead of forcing the ship to move in a straight line, as Astran pilots usually did, she let it drift slightly, feeling how it wanted to move in the local gravity field. The small ship floated forward smoothly, swaying slightly like a leaf on water. Blue's eyes widened as she felt how each tiny gravitational pull affected their movement. When she adjusted course, she worked with these forces instead of fighting them. "Outstanding," Mary called from her station. "You're naturally compensating for the station's rotation. Most students take days to feel that." Encouraged, Blue tried a gentle turn. The ship responded beautifully, using the station's gravity field to help it move. She could feel everything: the push and pull of nearby masses, the subtle effects of their own momentum, even the tiny influence of passing ships. "I think," Red spoke up suddenly, "I understand now why you call it surfing." The pilot had relaxed slightly, watching the sensor readings with growing interest. "It's not about forcing your way through space. It's about riding it." Tom smiled. "Exactly. Space isn't empty at all. It's full of forces we can work with, if we learn to feel them." Blue brought the ship to a gentle stop, marveling at how natural it felt. "Our ancestors knew this, didn't they? Before the Great Loss. This is how ships were meant to move." "Ready to try leaving the hangar?" Tom asked carefully. Blue looked at her companions. Green nodded eagerly, while Red gave a smaller, nervous nod. She turned back to the controls, feeling the currents waiting outside. "Yes," she said firmly. "But stay close." "Always," Tom assured her. "Remember, every human pilot started exactly where you are now. Take your time. Feel the void. It's not your enemy." Blue engaged the engines again, this time pointing toward the hangar's force field and the open space beyond. As they moved forward, she didn't feel the old fear. Instead, she felt something she hadn't expected: joy. The void was waiting, and for the first time in 3,000 years, an Astran ship prepared to dance with it. 3 days into their practical training, alarms blared across the Space Academy's training zone. The local star monitoring system had detected an incoming solar flare, larger than any the training fleet had faced this season. All ships return to base immediately. The control tower's voice echoed through every comm system. The training vessels began turning back, their movements quick but orderly. Blue's hands tightened on her ship's controls. They were the farthest out, practicing basic solar wind techniques with Tom's guidance. Green and Red watched their sensors with growing panic as the massive wave of energy approached. "We need to get to a hyperspace lane," Red said, his voice shaking. "The traditional escape routes." "There's no time," Tom cut in calmly. "The flare will hit us before we reach any safe zone. But don't worry, we can ride this." All three Astrans turned to stare at him in horror. "Ride a solar flare?" Blue whispered. "Trust me," Tom said, moving to the auxiliary control panel. "Remember everything you've learned about feeling the currents. This is just a bigger wave, that's all." The sensor displays lit up with warnings as the flare approached. Other training ships had already reached the safety of the Academy's shields. Blue could feel the growing energy through her ship's sensors, a massive wall of force heading straight for them. "We'll die," Green said quietly, clutching his data pad like a shield. "No, we won't," Tom replied firmly. "Blue, do you trust me?" She looked at her instructor, then at the approaching solar flare. 3,000 years of cultural fear screamed at her to run, to hide. But something else, something new, made her nod. "Good. Turn the ship 40 degrees to port. Bow up 15 degrees. Tom's voice was steady, confident. "We're going to catch this wave just right." Blue followed his instructions, feeling the ship settle into position. The solar flare was visible now, a wall of brilliant energy rushing toward them. "Power to the magnetic shields," Tom guided. "But don't fight the energy. Let it flow around us. Remember the hangar practice. Same principle, bigger scale." The flare hit. Blue's first instinct was to brace for destruction. But instead, she forced herself to feel the energy flow, just as she practiced with smaller solar winds. The ship shuddered, then lifted. They were flying faster than any Astran ship had flown in 3,000 years, riding the massive wave of solar energy like a leaf in a hurricane. But they weren't being thrown around randomly. Blue could feel the currents in the energy, the patterns hidden in the chaos. "Now," Tom said calmly, "let's show you what void surfing is really about." With small adjustments to their shields and angle, Tom helped Blue guide their ship through the flare. They weren't just surviving the solar storm, they were using it. Each massive surge of energy pushed them faster, carried them further. Green's scientific curiosity overcame his fear as he watched the sensor readings. "We're covering more distance in minutes than our fastest ships cover in hours." Red had stopped shaking, his pilot's instincts finally understanding what they were feeling. The energy patterns, they're like what we saw in the training simulations, just bigger. Blue felt it too. The same dance they'd been practicing with tiny solar winds was playing out here, on a massive scale. Her fear melted away, replaced by pure exhilaration, as she guided the ship through the burning energy. When they finally emerged from the other side of the flare, they were closer to the Academy than they'd started, having used the energy to boost them home. Blue's hands were steady on the controls now, her eyes wide with wonder. "That was..." She started, then stopped, lacking words to describe what they'd just experienced. "That," Tom said with a smile, "was void surfing." Still afraid, Blue looked at her trembling companions, seeing the same realization in their eyes. They had faced their people's greatest fear, the uncontrolled forces of space, and found not death, but freedom. "No," she answered, her voice strong and clear. "We're not afraid anymore." 6 months after the solar flare incident, the Space Academy's main hangar looked very different. Crystalline Astran ships sat alongside human vessels, their designs starting to blend in fascinating ways. A group of human students gathered around Green as he explained the complex mathematics behind gravitational field mapping. "Your traditional sensors are amazing. One student said, watching as Green's equipment created a detailed three-dimensional map of nearby space currents. "We've been doing this mostly by feel, but having exact measurements helps so much." Blue watched from the observation deck, standing next to Tom and Mary. More Astran ships arrived each week as word spread about the joint training program. Each new group came with less fear and more curiosity than the last. "They're already improving our navigation systems," Mary noted, pointing to a newly installed display showing void currents in real time. "Who knew our intuitive approach could work so well with their precise measurements?" A training flight passed by the window, led by Red. The once nervous Astran pilot now guided mixed groups of human and Astran students through their first experiences with solar wind riding. His ship moved with a grace that combined the best of both species' approaches, the precise control of Astran technology with the flowing freedom of human void surfing. "Look at that," Tom said proudly as the training group executed a perfect gravitational slingshot maneuver. "Red students are learning both traditions at once. They're already better than either of us were alone." Blue nodded, remembering her own first terrified attempts at void surfing. "We're planning the first official competition next month," she said. "The council actually approved it. That would have been unthinkable half a year ago." The competition had been Red's idea, a friendly contest between human and Astran pilots to demonstrate different approaches to space navigation. But as the training progressed, the lines between the two styles had started to blur. In another part of the hangar, human engineers worked with Astran designers, creating new ships that combined both species' technologies. The rigid crystal structures of Astran vessels were being modified to flex and flow with space currents, while human ships gained the precise sensing capabilities of their alien counterparts. "Did you see the new simulator programs?" Mary asked, pulling up a display. "Green's team adapted them to show exactly what we feel when we're surfing the void. Now students can see the currents before they feel them." A cheer erupted from a hangar floor. A young Astran pilot had just completed their first solo flight through a complex series of gravity wells, something that would have been considered suicidal by their people just months ago. "They're not just learning to surf," Tom observed. "They're making it their own." Blue smiled as another training group prepared for launch. This one was led by a human instructor using an Astran ship design. The crystal vessel moved with fluid grace as it guided its students out into space. "The council wants to establish a permanent academy branch in Astran space," Blue revealed. "They're talking about mapping new regions, establishing travel routes we never thought possible before." "Combining our void surfing with your hyperspace lanes?" Tom asked. "That would open up huge parts of the galaxy." "Exactly. Safe, established routes for regular travel, but with the ability to explore beyond them when needed." Blue's eyes sparkled with excitement. "We're already planning expeditions to some of the stellar phenomena we've only observed from a distance." The hangar doors opened as another training flight returned. The ships moved in perfect formation, humans and Astrans flying together as if they'd been doing it forever. Each vessel showed touches of both cultures: solar sails made of crystal, human-style maneuvering thrusters alongside Astran sensors. "The first joint void surfing competition opens in 3 weeks," Mary reminded them, checking her schedule. "Are you both ready to judge?" Blue watched as Red's training group executed one final maneuver before landing, their movements showing both the precision of Astran tradition and the flowing grace of human void surfing. "We're ready," she said confidently. "And I think this is just the beginning." 1 year after the first Astrans learned to surf the void, a massive ship hovered at the edge of explored space. The Star Dancer was unlike anything either species had built before, a perfect blend of human and Astran engineering. Its crystal hull flowed like water, while solar sails spread wide to catch the stellar winds. Blue stood on the bridge, now wearing the combined uniform of the Joint Space Exploration Force. Around her, a mixed crew of humans and Astrans worked at their stations. Tom sat in the co-pilot's chair, while Red confidently handled the main controls. "Final checks complete," Green announced from his science station. The stellar maze is exactly as our long-range sensors showed, a region of overlapping gravitational fields that would have been impossible to navigate using either of our old methods alone. The stellar maze had been a legend among both species. Humans had tried to surf through it but couldn't map the constantly shifting gravity fields. Astrans had perfect maps but couldn't build hyperspace lanes through the chaotic space. Now they faced it together. All hands, Blue called over the ship's comm. Prepare for void surfing with full Astran sensors active. The Star Dancer moved forward gracefully. Its crystal hull channeled data directly to the crew, letting them feel every current and eddy in space. Red guided the ship with small, precise movements, while the human crew members called out the patterns they felt in the void. First gravity wave approaching, Tom announced. Just like in training, everyone. Feel the flow, trust the sensors. The ship entered the maze. Gravitational forces pulled at them from all directions, but the Star Dancer rode them like music. Red used the Astran sensors to plot each force precisely, while the human crew members anticipated the changes in the currents. Look at these readings, Green said excitedly. The gravity fields are creating patterns we've never seen before. The maze isn't chaos. It's the most complex dance we've ever tried to join. Blue watched as her crew worked in perfect harmony. Human intuition predicted the shifts in space, while Astran precision guided them safely through. The Star Dancer didn't fight the forces around it. It became part of them. Multiple stellar phenomena ahead, an Astran sensor operator called out. Solar winds intersecting with gravity wells. Perfect conditions for void surfing. Tom grinned. Red, want to show them how we do this now. Red's hands moved confidently over the controls. The Star Dancer caught a solar wind, using it to power through a series of gravity wells. Each maneuver was precisely calculated yet flowed naturally into the next. They were mapping new space faster than either species had ever managed alone. A young Astran cadet approached Blue, eyes wide with excitement. Commander, could you teach me more about reading the solar currents? The way humans feel them. I mean, the sensors are good, but I want to understand the music of it. Blue smiled, remembering her own first lessons. Of course, that's why we're out here, to learn from each other, to explore together. The Star Dancer emerged from another complex series of maneuvers. Ahead lay space that neither humans nor Astrans had ever visited. New worlds waited to be discovered, new phenomena to be studied and understood. You know, Tom said quietly to Blue, a year ago your people wouldn't go anywhere without a mapped hyperspace lane. Now look at us. Blue nodded, watching Red confidently surf their ship through another gravity wave. And a year ago, your people were taking unnecessary risks because you couldn't map the currents precisely. Now we're both better. Next generation of pilots won't even think about it, Tom added. They'll grow up knowing both ways, making them their own. No fear, no recklessness, just pure exploration. The Star Dancer's crystal hull sparkled as it caught the light of unknown stars. Human void surfing and Astran precision had opened up the galaxy in ways neither species had dreamed possible. As they pushed further into unexplored space, Blue realized a fundamental truth. The void had never been their enemy. They had just needed to learn its dance together. All hands, she announced, prepare for deep space exploration. Let's show the galaxy how humans and Astrans surf the void.